Hey everyone, I welcome you all to Azure Back to School event run by my friend and fellow MVP Dwayne Natwick. It's an yearly event that Dwayne organizes where he works with different community contributors and makes some awesome Azure related content available for the community for free. If you haven't checked the website for the event, I would highly encourage you to do the same. Today I'm going to talk about Azure policies and how you can deploy them as code to make them manageable and repeatable at the enterprise scale. My name is Vaibhav Gujral. I am a cloud architect and a Microsoft Azure MVP. I am based out of Omaha, Nebraska. I would be sharing my contact information towards the end of this video, through which you can reach out to me in case you need to ask me anything related to Azure. Let's talk about Azure policies. Azure policies are a set of rules that you can define to enforce organizational standards and assessing compliance to those standards. Azure policies continuously scan the Azure resources and provide compliance reports in a dashboard. It also offers remediation steps to fix the non-compliant resources in your Azure environment. Few examples of an Azure policy could be allowed resource types, which allows provisioning of specific resource types, allowed locations, which allow users to provision resources only in specific Azure location. You can control the virtual machines queues that your users can choose for their virtual machines using allowed virtual machines queues policy. You can either create custom policies for your specific use case, or you can also opt from built-in policies offered by Azure. There are a bunch of built-in policies that Azure comes with, including the examples I mentioned in the last slide. Head out to the link down below to check out the complete list of the built-in policies. When you are assigning policies, you have two different options. You can create individual policies and assign them at different scopes like management groups or subscriptions. Alternatively, if you have a number of policies that needs to be applied at the same scope, you can create an initiative which is nothing but a collection of individual policies. All the policies within an initiative behave as a group and are applied together on the assigned scope. When you create an Azure policy, there are three different parts that you shall define, namely policy definition, policy assignment, and policy parameters. Policy definition defines the condition on which the policy will report on, like the allowed queues for the virtual machines or the allowed locations. Policy assignment is where we assign the policy to a scope. I will touch upon it shortly, but at this moment, as I have mentioned before, the policy is inherited in the scope. If you assign it to a subscription, all the resource groups and resources inherit the policy. Lastly, policy parameters are the values in your policy that you can parameterize to reduce duplicate policies. Similar to a policy, an initiative also has a definition, assignment, and parameters. Initiative definition defines the group of policies that are part of the initiative. Assignment and parameters behave the same way like policies. The advantage you get out of using initiatives is that it greatly reduces management of policies. Just like policies, you can create your own initiatives or use the Azure provided built-in ones. For the complete list of Azure provided built-in initiatives, head out to the link that I have listed down there. A policy definition is a JSON-based template. It has four main sections. You define the different properties for the policy like name, type, if it is custom or built-in, etc. Next, you define the parameters that you can specify at the time of assignment. Parameters allow you to use the same policy definition across different scopes. For example, in this case, I can apply this very policy definition on two different subscriptions, and I can have completely different list of allowed queues for both the scopes. Parameters promote reusability in a nutshell. The next section defines the policy rule, which defines the condition that is evaluated. As you can see here, it checks for all the virtual machine resource types and checks for the SKU names against the list of allowed SKUs. Once the policy is evaluated, An effect defines what happens as the outcome. Each policy definition has to have an effect. In this example, the effect is deny, meaning if the policy evaluates true for the policy rule defined above against the assigned scope, it denies the request. Now there are 7 different effects that are currently supported for Azure policies. Starting with append, which is used to add additional fields to the requested resource during creation or update. For example, if I want to add a firewall rule every time a SQL server is created, I can utilize append effect. Audit is used to create a warning effect in the activity log when evaluating a non-compliant resource, but it doesn't stop the request. For example, if I want to audit all the existing virtual machines against the allowed SKUs, I can do so. Audit if not exists audits when there is no related resources that exist based on an existence condition that you define in the policy definition. For example, if I want to audit all the extensions on a virtual machines that doesn't exist, I can use audit if not exist effect. Next effect is deny, and as the name suggests, it is used to prevent a resource request that doesn't match defined standards through a policy definition and it fails the request. Similar to audit if not exist, deploy if not exist deploys a resource when the existence condition is evaluated false. Disabled is used for disabling a single assignment instead of disabling all the assignments. Last but not the least, modify is similar to how append works, but modify is recommended only for tags, and for everything else, append shall be used. Before we move on, it is important to understand the sequence of how the policy effects are evaluated. Disabled is checked first to determine if the policy rules should be evaluated. Append and modify are then evaluated. Since either could alter the request, a change made may prevent an audit or deny effect from triggering. Deny is then evaluated. By evaluating deny before audit, double logging of an undesired resource is prevented. And lastly, audit is evaluated. Let's touch upon the scope hierarchy we have talked about earlier. If I apply a policy at my root management group, it gets inherited by all the underlying resources. In this particular case, the policy is inherited by both production and non-production management groups and the subscriptions and resources under them. Likewise, if I apply a policy on the production management group, it is inherited by all the underlying subscriptions and resources, but not by the root management group or the non-production management group. Let's jump onto the Azure portal to quickly explore Azure policies and how you can get started. Alright, I'm now in Azure portal. To get started, click on the hamburger icon. Go to all services and search for policy. Select policy, and as you can see here, you can see the overall compliance picture of your overall Azure environment. It gives you an overall status of a resource compliance. It shows you how many resources are compliant and how many of them are not compliant. It also shows you how many initiatives are non-compliant and how many policies are non-compliant. If you'll go towards the left menu and click on definitions, it will give you a list of all the policies and initiatives that have definitions in your environment. You can go ahead and filter it based on the definition type. You can filter it based on initiatives or policy, or you can view all. You can choose whether you want to see built-in policies and initiatives, or you can choose custom. Built-ins are the ones which are provided by Microsoft. Customs are the ones that are authored by you. If I go and choose built-in, there are all built-in ones listed there. If I select custom, I don't have a custom policy as of now, that's why nothing is shown there. Likewise, every policy and initiative can be categorized into one of the categories. You can go and filter your policies and initiatives based on the category. For example, I can go and choose all the policies and initiatives for API management and work on those. I'll undo that filter. And last but not the least, I can also go and search for keywords in the policy or initiative names. For example, if I type allowed locations, it filters all the policies with that keyword in its name. I'll go ahead to the assignments to show you what I have assigned to my environment right now. There is one initiative assigned by Azure Security Center to one of my subscriptions by default, and you will see one policy which I have assigned myself. That policy is allowed virtual machine size queues. What essentially it is doing is it's only allowing me to create any virtual machine in my Azure environment which is of this size. If I go ahead and create any other virtual machine with any other queue, it won't let me create it. But you will ask me, when I go back here in the compliance blade, it shows that there is one virtual machine which is non-compliant against this policy. The reason is I have created that virtual machine before I have assigned this policy to my environment. If I click on this policy, you can find out the machine which was non-compliant, which is test VM. I can certainly go ahead and resize it to the allowed size to make this item compliant. Now if I look into the definition, this has an effect of deny, meaning it won't let me create any new virtual machines which are not of the approved size. I'll go back to my home page here, and I'll try creating a virtual machine. I can choose a resource group here. I can give it a name. I can leave rest of the options as is. I won't choose the size which is approved. I will instead choose a size which is not approved. I'll give it a username, a password. I will disable the public inbound ports. Rest on all the pages, I'll choose the default options, and I'll go ahead and click on review and create. As soon as I create review plus create, it goes and validates against all the policies that I have created, and as you can see, validation has failed. When I click on that, it gives me a message that the policy that is blocking me is allowed virtual machine size queues, and the reason is the VM's queue that I am using is not approved for use, and I should contact my administrator to unblock me. If I click on that policy, it will open up the policy that has been blocking me, and it's the same policy that I have assigned earlier. And here's the policy, and here was the non-compliance message that was coming, and I'm only allowing standard D16 ASV4, whereas I was trying to create a machine of size D at ASV4. We just saw how you can get started with Azure policies to implement governance in your Azure environment. But as a seasoned cloud practitioner, I can assure you that sooner or later, the management of the policies is going to become an overhead for you. Of course, it is easy to manage policies through Azure portal, but as the team size grows and the number of policies grow, it becomes extremely difficult to manage version history for the changes in policies, and also the approach does not support repeatability across multiple environments. You can improve the manageability and repeatability for your Azure policies by managing and deploying the policies as code. Azure Policy as Code relies on two core concepts which I hope everyone will be aware of: infrastructure as code and DevOps. Essentially, the recommendation is to keep policy definition in source control, and whenever a change is made, test and validate in a lower environment and ensure all your resources are compliant to your policies before you move to production. You can deploy both policies and initiatives as code. As I was showing earlier, each policy and initiative comes with a definition, and when you start writing code for them, you might need different JSON files that align to the portions of the definition. To start with, the policy.json holds the policy definition, and policyset.json holds the initiative definition. Policy parameters.json holds the parameters portion of the policy definition, Likewise, policy set parameters.json holds the parameters portion of the initiative definition. Policy.rules.json holds the policy rules, and last but not the least, policy set.definitions.json holds the properties.policy definitions portion of the definition. Apart from these policy files, there can also be multiple assign.json files, one file for each assignment. Let's quickly review the workflow for Azure Policy as code. You start with a policy definition and or initiative definition. You define the policy and initiative in the definition file. You then assign it to a lower environment with enforcement mode set to disabled so that the resource creation and updates are not blocked and existing resources are still audited for compliance to the updated policy definition. Then you go and check the compliance states for the current environment. For deploy if not exist and modify effects, you can also create remediation tasks to fix the non-compliant resources and improve your overall compliance score. Each remediation task uses the underlying managed identity for the respective Azure policy. The managed identity needs to have appropriate permissions on the policy scope to make changes on the underlying resources. Once all the resources are compliant, change the enforcement mode to enabled and promote it to a higher environment. Let's jump onto Azure portal and see Azure Policy as code in play. Alright, I'm back in Azure portal. I'll go back to the policy blade. I'll go ahead and pull up definitions. I'm going to use allowed locations policy for this demo. But since built-in policies are read-only and we cannot make any modifications to those, I am going to clone the existing policy that you see here and create a custom policy out of it so that I can make changes to it. I'll go ahead and click on duplicate definitions. I'll save the duplicate definition in the root management group. I'll leave rest of the options as is and click on save. I'll go back to my policy blade, and as you can see here is my custom policy which got created for allowed locations. It is stored in tenant root group. I'll go ahead and assign it to my root management group too. I'll click on assign. I'll keep the scope as tenant root group. I'll leave rest of the options as is. And here is the enforcement mode. When you are assigning it to a lower environment for your testing and validation, you can keep it as disabled, and once everything is compliant, you can go ahead and switch it back to enabled. I'll keep it as enabled for now. I'll click on next. I'll go ahead and choose locations that I want to be allowed as part of this policy. Since Central US is near to my location, I'll go ahead and select Central US. Click on next. Since this comes with a deny effect, I will not create a managed identity because I don't need a remediation task, and remediation tasks are only supported by policies which comes with deploy if not exist and modify effect. I'll keep next. I'll provide a message here. Please choose right location. I'll click next and I'll create the assignment, and the assignment has been created successfully. I'll go back to the policy and I will pull up my assignment, and here you can see here is the assignment that I have just created. Now I have already created a repo, a private repo inside my GitHub account. As you can see here, there is nothing else apart from a readme file. I can certainly go and create policy.json file and a GitHub action to deploy my policy changes to Azure all manually. But for this demo, to save some time, I would like to utilize a feature that Microsoft offers for exporting a policy definition and assignment to GitHub action within the Azure portal. So I'll again go back to the Azure portal, click on policy. I'll go to the definitions. I'll search for the custom policy that I have created. Here is the one. I'll click on that and I'll go ahead and export definition from here. Since my GitHub account is already connected to my Azure account, it automatically uses it. It automatically fetches the private repo that I have. You can certainly go and choose from a different repo if you have multiple repos. You can choose from multiple branches if you have multiple branches. You can certainly provide a different directory structure. I will retain it as is. You can either skip the files in the destination if they have the same name. Otherwise you can overwrite. Default option is overwrite. I'll keep it as is. I'll go ahead and click on policies. As you can see, my custom policy is already selected, but at this point it's only the definition, but there is no assignment which has been included. I'll go ahead and click on assignment. I'll go ahead and click on the assignment that I have done on the management group and update it. Now as you can see, it's gonna export both definition and assignment. I'll go ahead and click on next review plus report. It says validation passed. It's going to export one definition and one assignment. I'll click on export. It will create a service principal for my GitHub account so that it can push back the policy changes whenever my GitHub action is executed. Once it's exported, I will go back to the GitHub to show you what it creates. As you can see, earlier when I was showing my GitHub repo, there was nothing apart from a README file. As you can see, the export is succeeded. I will go back and refresh my GitHub repo here. As you can see, what Azure has done here is to create two different folders here. One, it has created a GitHub action in which, as you can see, it's going to connect to my Azure account and it's going to push the policy code changes. And in the policies folder, it has exported my policy definition, which is in policy.json file, and my assignment file. Let me go to the policy definition file. Here is the policy definition file. I can certainly go ahead and make changes here. Let's say I go ahead and click on edit and make a small change. Hello world. This is Azure back to school demo. I'll go ahead and commit my changes. I'll go back to my assignment, and as you can see, I was only allowing Central US before. I also want to allow South Central US. I'll go ahead and click on edit. I'll go ahead and add South Central US there too. And I'll go ahead and commit my changes. Now I will go back to my actions. Here's my workflow. As you can see, it didn't get triggered because it has to be triggered manually. It doesn't support automatic trigger currently. I'll go ahead and click on run workflow and I'll run my workflow. And as you can see, my GitHub action workflow has been triggered. I'll click on that to see what's happening. It says it's applying Azure policies. If I click on that, I can see more details on what's happening in my GitHub action. It is setting up job. It will go ahead and deploy my policy and then it will be completed. As you can see, my GitHub action workflow is completed. It has deployed my code changes. I'll go back to my Azure homepage, come back to policies again, go to the definition and search for my Azure policy. Here is my custom policy. As you can see, my changes, hello world, this is Azure back to school demo, has shown up in the definition. I'll go ahead and click on the assignment and see if it includes South Central US now too or not. I'll click on the assignment and here you go. As you can see, earlier it was Central US, now it also includes South Central US. That pretty much sums up my demo. You have seen how I went to GitHub and edited the policy definition and pushed it to Azure and the changes took place. You can do the same thing using Azure DevOps. Unfortunately, there is no built-in task that you can use in Azure DevOps today, but I am very hopeful that it will be available in the future. But you can certainly use Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell task within Azure DevOps pipelines to go ahead and deploy your policy as code from Azure DevOps. We have just seen how easy it is to get started with Azure Policy as Code. As a best practice, when you are creating your project for Azure Policies, follow this structure. Have a root folder called as Policies. Under Policies, have different subfolders for each policy. Under each policy subfolder, you can store policy definition, parameters, and assignment files. Similar to policies, here is the recommended project structure for initiatives. You can start with initiatives root folder. Under that you have separate subfolder for each initiative holding appropriate file for each initiative. Once you make changes and push the changes to your policies, here are some recommendations for testing and validating your changes. The end goal of testing and validation phase is to check the non-compliance in your Azure environment against the new Azure policy changes and run remediation tasks if any to improve the compliance score. To start with, test and validate in a non-production environment like dev or test. Start with the enforcement mode as disabled and change it to enabled once the changes are tested and validated and all the resources are compliant. Use the correct scope for the policy assignment like subscription or resource group or a management group as well. With the Azure Policy Compliance Scan action, you can now easily trigger a on-demand scan from your GitHub workflow on one or multiple resources, resource groups or subscriptions and continue or fail the workflow based on the compliance state of resources. You can also use the same GitHub action to generate a report on the compliance state of scanned resources for further analysis. You can use security and compliance tasks in a gate in Azure DevOps to identify, analyze, evaluate the security risk, and determine the mitigation measures required to reduce the risk. If you have Azure policies with deploy if not exist and modify effects, utilize remediation tasks to fix your resources and improve overall compliance score. With that, I am done with my presentation. Here are the resources you can refer to if you would like to learn more about Azure Policy as Code. I would be sharing this slide with Dwayne and hopefully you will find a link in the description below to get the slides. Lastly, here is my contact information. If you would like to connect with me or if you have any questions related to Azure policies or Azure in general, please feel free to reach out to me through any of these channels. I am active on LinkedIn and Twitter. I do run my blog and YouTube channel to which you can subscribe to. And that's it. I would like to thank you once again for watching this video till the end. Much appreciated. I wish you all the good health and I hope you stay safe and healthy. Goodbye.